Hi everyone, just before we get into this video, I just want to explain very quickly. When I made this video yesterday, I did a really long intro, and then when I watched it back in the edit, I was just boring myself to death. So I thought I'd just film this very short intro and then we'll get straight into the video. But just to explain where this video came from, somebody who watched one of my previous videos got in touch with me and asked me to make a video on cleaning the brake calipers. So this is how I do it. Now, I'm happy to learn from other people as well. I'm not an expert, I'm not the font of all knowledge, but this is how I do it. Feel free to interact in the comments. And what I do with this video, it's a little bit of a lengthy video, but what I'm trying to do is slow the process down as much as possible and explain as much as possible as I go. Many other videos out there on YouTube, and some very, very good ones. But what I find sometimes is that when you find these how-to videos, they don't always explain why you do certain things that you need to do. So that's what I've tried to do. Slow it down, give some explanations behind why some things are done, a few things to look out for, and I just want it to be as helpful as possible. So here we go, folks. Enjoy the video. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take a 5mm Allen key and I'm going to crack open the brake pad retaining pins. The only reason I'm doing that now is because it's easier to crack those open while the caliper's still fixed to the bike. So I'm not going to unscrew them, I'm not going to take them off, I'm just going to crack them. So 5mm Allen key, just to crack them off, just so that they are loose, and then it just makes them a little bit easier rather than holding the caliper in your hand and then trying to crack them off. Obviously being careful of the brake line. Honestly, it's very, very easy to clean these. You know, a lot of people might fear touching the brakes, taking the calipers off, etc. But if you and I've said these words before, right? If you're slow and methodical, and you double check everything, then it's very, very easy to do. And actually it's essential to do for any biker. You know, you don't want to put your bike into a garage every time the brakes need cleaned. And you can imagine that, especially during the summer, when you're, well, actually I mean all year round of course, but you know, for us summer riders, I guess, when you're doing a lot of miles, your brakes are getting hot, there's brake dust building up inside the caliper, around the pistons, etc. They do need to be cleaned because it will make your brakes perform a lot better. Now, I've got a towel just sort of wrapped up here just to protect the wheel as I lift the caliper off. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and position this towel against the bike, so when I'm spraying brake cleaner everywhere, it's not going to go all over my paintwork. So the calipers are held on by 2 bolts, one there and one there, very simple. These are torqued up, so on my bike it's a 12mm nut. On my Fireblade it was a 14mm, so you're going to have to check obviously your bike. And you don't have to interfere with the brake line at all. You know, don't ever undo this bolt here, which is your banjo bolt, because then you will get brake fluid leaking out. And you may, depending on how much fluid you lose, you may have to end up bleeding the brakes again. So very simply, all I'm going to do is crack these nuts off. So they are torqued, but they will come off. There you go, nice and loose. And then once they're cracked, they literally just screw out nice and easily. If your bike hasn't had this done in a long time, then obviously your caliper bolts might be a bit more difficult to get off. You shouldn't get too much rust inside there, but it is possible that these bolts could rust up, so it is worth checking them as well. There you go, that is your caliper bolt, or one of them, and there's the other one. So I can tell, oh yeah, see the previous owners used some grease there. Anyway, I'm going to give these a clean off, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of, just a tiny smear of copper grease around the threads and around the shaft of the bolt, and it just helps prevent corrosion. So now that the two bolts are out, you might have to wiggle the caliper backwards, sort of right and left a little bit, just to push the pads out a little bit, depending on how tight they are on there. But these feel nice and loose. So literally just wiggle them off. And this is why I've got the towel here, because as you push these back towards the wheel, you might end up scratching the wheel. There you go. And that is your caliper off. Now what you don't want to do is let go of this and put a huge amount of force on the brake line. Some people say you shouldn't allow your brake lines to dangle like that. It's okay for a few minutes at a time. If you want to be really careful and you want to be really particular about it, you can get a bungee and then just hook these up to the handlebar or somewhere, just so that they're not hanging on the weight of the brake lines aren't being pulled by the weight of the caliper. But for a few minutes at a time, if you're careful, it's okay. So that is your caliper off, and then you can see your brake pads in there. Now you can see from the picture there that there is plenty of pads left on mine. They're fairly new actually. There's probably what, 4 mil, 5 mil on those, and also the wear on them is fairly even. Here's a top tip for you. So the grooves that you can see in the brake pad surface, those are for dispersing heat. Now look, bear with me, let me get a smaller pointy thing for you, just 1 second. So in the grooves themselves, you'll see the grooves only go down so far. So you've got groove, 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 and then you've got the pad surface just along there. Now once your brake pads get down to level with the bottom of that groove, it is time to change your brake pads, of course, if you haven't changed them before that point. Now general rule of thumb that I use, and you don't have to use this, but I normally, if my pads get down to about 2 mil of pad, 2 mil left, then I'll change them. What you don't want to do is keep running and running and running the same pads to the point where it gets down to bare metal. So this copper coloured metal is the actual plate of the pad, because that will then rub on your disc. That would be metal to metal contact on your disc, and over a very short period of time actually that would cause huge problems. It would ruin your discs and it would be very, very expensive. Back to the grooves. Now the grooves are there to disperse heat, and allow the brake dust and the heat and everything to sort of travel through those grooves and then disperse away from the calipers. So those grooves are really important. So if you've worn your pads all the way down so there's no groove left and there's just a flat pad surface, which is probably about 1 millimeter, so between the bottom of the groove there and the metal plate is about 1 millimeter. If you get down so there's no groove left, then there's nowhere for the heat to go, and then what will happen is these pads will start to break down very quickly and you'll end up with bare metal to metal contact anyway. And you can see from the picture hopefully that the caliper surface here that bolts onto the fork legs is pretty clean. So these brakes, they are in good condition. This is the first time actually that I've had these brakes off this bike. I've only had it since November and I've only ridden it a few times. This is the first time I've took these calipers off, and they are pretty clean. There is a bit of brake dust in there I can see on the pistons. I'm not going to score the pistons with this screwdriver. I'll show you how we clean those in a second, but actually they're not bad at all. So these surfaces are nice and clean, which means that the caliper is going to sit nice and flush onto the fork leg. Loads of life left in the pads, and overall cleanliness is not bad at all. But of course yours could be worse. They could be worse. So anyway, let's move on and waffling now. So I've already cracked off the caliper bolts. Probably not in very good shot here with a camera, am I? There you go. Yeah, pissing about with the camera angle here, trying to get you as good a shot as I can. So anyway, that pad retaining pin is out. This pad retaining pin is now out almost. Okay, now that both the pad retaining pins are out, the pads themselves will drop out. So I'll lay those down out of the way, and then you'll see that at the top of the caliper you've got this spring. Now that spring can come out as well. Now because these aren't too bad actually, I'm not going to take that spring out. I'm going to leave it in, but you can, if you do a bit of jiggery pokery and angle that spring, it will come out, and it is a good idea to clean it. But as you can see, it's pretty clean, so I'm not going to bother taking it out. I'm just going to show you the process of cleaning up the calipers, etc. And actually this is a good chance now to zoom in a little bit on the pistons themselves. So you'll see that there is a little bit of brake dust built up around the outside of the pistons. So this is a 4-pot caliper, so it's got four pistons, and notice that the pistons are quite evenly pushed out as well. If when you take your calipers off you've got 2 pistons that are pushed out so far, and then 2 pistons are a lot further or a lot less, then there might be an issue there, and it might be that you need to actually push the pistons out a lot further just to clean behind them. Now hopefully I'm making sense. It will all start to make sense. So he says at the base of these pistons, so in the caliper body itself, at the base of the pistons there is a dust seal, and that dust seal obviously prevents dust and grime getting into the pistons and causing rust and corrosion. However, that can still happen over time, and you will get water sometimes ingress into down the side of the pistons past the dust seals, and it will cause a bit of corrosion near the bottom of the dust seals. That corrosion can sometimes push the seal upwards, and if you've got your calipers off like this, it's a good chance to inspect and just make sure that you can't see any of the dust seals poking up at the side of the pistons. If you can see the dust seals poking up at the side of the pistons, the chances are it's the dust seal that's preventing the piston moving in and out as you use the brakes, which could be causing the uneven wear on your brake pads. It could be causing your pistons to stick, and it is worth then maybe thinking about getting a complete caliper, deassembling the calipers, getting them cleaned properly, taking the calipers off. Now, and if you're not sure how to do that, then get a professional to do it. But if they look good, and as these do, all 4 are quite evenly spaced, they're evenly pushed out, which means they're probably healthy, the dust seals are intact, they're doing their job, they're seated nice and neatly where they should be. So this is just a case of giving these a bit of a clean. Did all that make sense? I hope it does. I'm probably explaining that really badly. Okay, now when it comes to actually cleaning the calipers, there is a couple of ways that you can do it. If they're really bad, what you can do is use warm soapy water, just like dishwasher soap, and warm water, and then get in there with a scrubbing brush. So spray some warm soapy water in there, get in there with a scrubbing brush. I'm only going to use brake fluid, but the reason is because they're not too bad. So if they were worse, what I would do is I'd use the warm soapy water. I would then spray them with brake fluid, just to clean off any residue of soapy water, and then blow them dry with a blower. because obviously you don't want water to sit inside these pistons, because as I previously said, that can lead to corrosion. So warm soapy water is fine as long as you use brake cleaner afterwards and then dry them off as much as you possibly can. I'm just going to use brake cleaner though, because it's not too bad. But the process of using warm soapy water is exactly the same as what I'm going to do with brake cleaner. With my lovely pink toothbrush, by the way. This toothbrush doesn't belong to any family members. I'm not going to put this back in the bathroom for my missus to use afterwards or anything like that, so don't panic. I've also hung this towel up here just to catch any overspray of brake fluid. So, very simply, let's start at this end. Spray your brake fluid in there. Get in there with a scrubbing brush, and you want to do around the piston body. And you want your pads to be able to move in and out freely, or as freely as possible, when you use the brakes. So spending a bit of time in getting, you know, the dirt and the grime and the brake dust build up off those areas is going to make those brakes operate, you know, a lot more smoothly, you know, a lot more freely. But for now, at least, that's that done. So look, folks, I'll stress again, these were really clean, but I'm making this video upon the request of someone else. I will show you the assembly of the calipers in a second, but yeah, that is pretty much done for me. Like I said, you can use soapy water and then brake cleaner, or you can use just brake cleaner if they're not too bad. But the idea is get as much brake dust off the inside of the caliper, the piston bodies, etc., as much as possible, so that yeah, so you get rid of all that crap. So that's that. Now let's move on to the pads and the pins, etc. Right, okay, pads and pins. So what I've got is, at the ready, I've got a bit of copper grease, so I'll show you how to put that in a second. I've got the brake cleaner and I've got a rag. So with the pins, remember these were the pad retaining pins. I'm just going to give that a little bit of a spray, wipe it off. Remember, these are in good condition, and as you can see from the brakes are also in really good condition as well. But something to check on your pins, these are prone to rust, and it's important that you get all that rust cleaned off. And then also something to look out for, and actually on closer inspection there's a little bit of pitting starting to happen here. So let me get another pointy thing. Basically the loops in the pads here, as the pin goes through there, obviously the pad hangs on that pin, but it also needs to travel forwards and backwards on that pin as you apply the brakes, and the pistons push the pads in and out. So what's important to check is that the pads can move freely along the shaft of this pin. And what you might get sometimes over time, I don't know if you can quite see that, I don't know how well that's going to focus, there's a tiny little bit of, I don't know if that's just a mark or whether it's actual pitting. Actually, that's quite smooth. Yeah, it is a tiny little bit of pitting. So what I might do actually, when I come to replace my brake pads, which obviously they've got a fair bit of life left in them now, when I do come to replace my brake pads, I'm going to replace these pins. The reason is, folks, these are perishable, these are consumable. And what happens is, over time, as the pad sort of moves in that area there on the along the pin, you do get a bit of pitting on the pin itself, and that's normal, that's okay. But if it gets too bad, then what can actually happen is they get stuck, and then as you pump the piston, as you pump the front brake, the pad itself will want to move,
it gets stuck up here on the pin. So you end up getting movement like this. I'm exaggerating obviously for effect, but you get movement like this. The pads actually end up swinging a little bit. So you'll get uneven wear on your brake pads. And obviously it's going to affect the brake performance because you haven't got a completely flat contact between the pad and the disc. So that's why these pins need to be cleaned and they need to be checked. And if they are starting to pit, like this one is, then it is worth changing them. So I will change these pins. My brakes, they work okay, but that will just continue to get worse. So what I'm going to do, like I said, next time I change my pads in a few thousand miles, I will change these pins as well. Anyway, I am waffling again. Right, that is the pins done. The same thing on the bolt. I'm not going to bore you to death by showing you the bolts. I'll do those off camera. But same process on the bolt. Spray it, brake cleaner, give it a clean. And then on your pads, you'll notice that on some pads, you get these anti-squeal shims. They will need a bit of a clean as well. And on my bike, you'll see it looks broken, but it's not. It's just asymmetrical. So I need to make sure that I get, once the back of the pad is wiped off and once the shim is cleaned, I just need to get that back and make sure that though they go in the right way. Now, in terms of copper grease, so I literally put a very light smear, although that looks more than like a very light smear, but I'm going to take the excess off in a second, onto the pad retaining pin, and then a little tiny bit onto the thread of that, and then that really is it. And then on the bolt, same again, just a light smear. Let me get a dirty rag for a second. Just to wipe off the excess. So just a smear, don't need a lot, little bit on the thread, stop any corrosion getting into the thread, and that is literally it. When it comes to the pads, some people will tell you that you need copper grease on the back of the pad. It's okay, and I'm going to put a very light smear on the back of that anti-squeal plate there. That's all I'm going to put, not a lot. The most important place for copper grease on the pad is the side of the pad, the ears, where it's in contact with the caliper, right? Where it's going to slide along the caliper surface. And that is all that I do. Let me put that on a hard surface. That's all that I do. Don't put loads on. Just a little bit there just to help. And the gloves don't help, but because that's the area of the pad that's going to slide along the caliper body, right? So that's the area that needs a bit of grease. But you don't need loads on the back of here. That's what the anti-squeal plates are for. A light smearing of grease, like I've put on there, helps minimize the chance of corrosion between the piston and the back of the pad. Yes, that's true. But yeah, you don't need loads and loads of grease. So I'm going to slide those pads back in there. Now, obviously, there is a little bit of grease on my gloves now because I've greased everything up, and you'll notice that I didn't touch the surface of the pads with greasy hands because, like I say, you don't want to contaminate the surface of the pads. So once the pads are in there, you then very simply need to support them underneath, get the pad retaining pin through the hole so it pops into the other side, same with the other pad retaining pin. Get it through so that it pops into the side. If you struggle to get that through, on the spring on the top, I don't know if you can quite see that, let me try and angle this a little bit. You just might need to push that spring down a little bit, because what happens is the pin goes through and the spring pushes up on the pin to help keep the pins in place. So once that's through, I can give it a couple of turns just to seat that. I'm not going to tighten everything up just yet, because what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to do the other side off camera, and then I'll come back and I'll tighten everything up on both sides at the same time. So now that the pads are in place, I just need to make sure that I part the pads, again being careful not to contaminate the pads with any grease, and then just get the calipers back on. There we go. Now the top tip is this: if you're really struggling to get these on, what you can do, take the pads back out, push the pistons open with your thumbs just a little bit to give yourself a bit more space, then put the pads back in and then put the calipers on. If you do that, however, bear in mind you are going to push the hydraulic fluid back up through the system, and it means that you might need to pump the brake a few times before you actually go riding, just to push those pistons closed to get the pads to clamp back on the disc again. And you'll notice that if you do that, if you do push the pistons back, then the first time that you clamp the brake lever, it'll feel as though you've got no brakes whatsoever. That's okay, it's pretty normal. And the only other thing I'll say is, if you are going to push the pistons back, take the cap off your brake fluid reservoir, wrap some cloth around the brake fluid reservoir to catch any overspill, because as you push those pistons back, the brake fluid's going to rise in the system and it might overspill over the it might overflow out of the brake reservoir a little bit, so you don't want brake fluid anywhere else on your bike. Okay, so at this stage nothing's been tightened up. I've got the two caliper bolts back in, the pad retaining pads are in, but they still need tightened. But what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to do the other caliper off camera, and then I will come back and I'll show you the process for centralizing the calipers when you then start to tighten everything back up. So stay tuned for that. It will be in an instant for you guys, but for me it'll be in about 10-15 minutes once I've done the other side. Okay, so everything's ready to tighten up now, but this is the way that I do it, folks. Is look, all I do is with the caliper bolts, I just wind them up. So let me undo that and I'll show you what I'm talking about so that you can see. So I will wind it on, grabbing the wrong bolt there, wind it on until the bolt just meets the caliper, and then I stop, and I'll do that top and bottom this side and then top and bottom the other side. Then what I'm going to do, let me explain it first and then I'll show you. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the other side where I've got a bit more room. I'm going to spin the wheel and then I'm going to grab the front brake. What that does, because these calipers are still sort of loose, in fact let me just adjust that. It's important actually at this stage is make sure the calipers are seated, married up to the brackets. So the reason that I do it this way is that when you spin the front wheel and then you grab the front brake, it locks those calipers in place and it centralizes the calipers on the discs. Then with the front brake still held, you then torque up each bolt on one side and on the other side as well. So let me demonstrate that and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Both calipers are sitting flush against the fork legs, and on both sides the bolts are just nipped up finger tight, literally just up to the point where they meet the caliper and then stop. And then I got my torque wrench ready, just making sure it's on the right torque. And all I'm then going to do is, and this is a bit tricky, especially if you're on your own, So spin the front brake, spin the front wheel, grab the front brake, and then while you're still holding the front brake, literally just, because I've beat my bike to death there, a little bit on each, just so they tighten up nice and evenly. I've still got hold of the front brake. There you go, that's the top one. And that's the bottom one. So that's that one torqued up. I'm going to hold the front brake still, and I'm going to reach around to the other side, and I'm going to do the other side. And let the front brake go. And those calipers, and therefore the pads, are now nice and centrally seated. There's no brake drag other than what you would normally expect. Like, you're going to hear a little bit of brake drag with disc brakes, but the wheel spins nice and freely. Those are torqued up. It's not finished yet, however, because remember, I haven't yet tightened up the caliper retaining pins. So these don't need to be torqued. So literally just get them so that they are nipped up, and then just a gentle nip. And then the same on the other side, and then we are done. Let me just do the other side, because otherwise I'll waffle, I'll talk, and then I'll forget. So let me just do the other side. But there is another top tip coming, folks. I haven't yet finished with the top tips. I'm full of top tips today. Now, before I show you this one final top tip, which can save you a lot of pain, and it can make life a hell of a lot easier for you, let me just summarize what we've done. So we've undone the caliper bolts. We have, well, first of all, loosened off the pad retaining pins, then undone the caliper bolts, took the calipers off, took the pads out, give everything a clean. Remember, you can use soapy water and then some brake fluid, and brake cleaner, or you can just use brake cleaner, again, depending on how bad they are. Remember to pay attention to the condition of your dust seals. If you can see them poking through, you need to give that some attention, because there's something not quite right. It could be some corrosion. Remember to have a look at whether your pistons are sort of pushed out evenly or not, because if they're not, again, that could indicate a problem that needs a bit of attention. Have a look at your pad retaining pins. Like I said, with mine, I'm going to replace them next time I replace the brake pads. Give everything a clean. Put copper grease where you should put copper grease. Don't put copper grease anywhere else. Don't contaminate the face of the pads. Put everything back in the reverse order, and then get everything sort of finger tightened. The caliper bolts finger tightened on each side. Spin the front wheel, grab the front brake. Then, while holding the front brake, torque your caliper bolts up on both sides. Then just spin the wheel, make sure everything sounds right and it sounds nice and it spins freely and sounds nice and even. Tighten up your pad retaining pins, and then job's a good one. And what you can do as well, folks, at this stage, I'm not doing it this time because I did it last time when I did the bobbins last week. You can give the discs a bit of a clean with some brake cleaner as well. And you might as well, like while you're cleaning the calipers, you might as well clean the discs. And of course the bobbins, you know, obviously I've done that in 2 separate videos, but you might as well do it all in one go, right? And then just double check the operation of your brakes. Make sure the lever feels like it did before. Make sure it's got the same pressure that it did before, especially if you've had to push the pistons back a little bit. Make sure you pump the lever and you've still got the right amount of pressure before you ride. And then just be methodical, you know. Anyway, right, one more top tip, folks. Let me grab something and show you what this top tip is. Okay, right, I'm trying to get a bit of light on the situation here, but I'm probably making it worse. So the top tip is this. Now that you've torqued up your caliper bolts, in fact, let me point without getting in the way. Now that you've torqued up your caliper bolts, each time before a ride, a really quick way of checking to make sure these haven't come loose is by very simply putting a little paint mark on the bolt and the corresponding small paint mark on the body of the caliper there. Now, not everybody likes doing that, and I get that, because you know, when you do this with, and I do this a lot actually, I do it with my rear axle nut, other bolts that require torque, that are, you know, vulnerable to vibration, etc, etc, then I will put a little, what's called a torque mark on there. Basically, they allow me to very quickly check that those two marks are still in line before each ride, and even during a ride, right? You know, if you're caning it down the road and you stop, there's nothing wrong with just a quick walk around the bike, make sure nothing's shaked its way loose. Shook its way. That's really bad English. But yeah, it just basically allows me to check to make sure those bolts haven't moved. So that's the top tip for you. You don't have to do that. Let me try and get a better, I don't know, I'm pissing about with the light here because it's starting to get dark now. But you get the idea, right? So that's the top tip as well, if you want to do it. So thanks for watching, folks. As always, the next video that I do, the next maintenance video, will be changing my clutch cables, which I'm going to try and do at some point soon, and then I'll get that uploaded whenever I get a chance. If anybody's got any comments, if anybody spotted any mistakes, feel free to let me know. Like, you know, I'm not infallible, right? I can make mistakes, or maybe there's some things that I can learn that will make what I do better, easier, and I'm always open to learning. So feel free to drop a comment and let me know if there's anything, but also let me know if you found this video useful. But as always, for now, stay safe and have fun.